Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely unravel one of the absolute greatest intellectual mysteries of the last 2 centuries. We're looking at the origins of the very language you're listening to right now, and how a totally groundbreaking new study has just thrown a massive wrench into everything we thought we knew about history, migration, and ancient DNA. Okay, let's just dive right into this. 3 billion. More than 3 billion people on Earth today, that is almost half the entire global population, speak a language belonging to the Indo-European family. From English and Spanish, all the way to Russian, Persian, and Hindi, they literally all trace back to a single ancient linguistic ancestor. So tracking down exactly where that mother language was born and how it managed to conquer the globe isn't just about words, right? It's really the story of human civilization itself. To really understand the controversy here, we first need to look at the reigning champion of historical theories. Section 1, the standard steppe story, the reigning champion. For over 200 years, linguists have been basically reverse engineering modern languages to reconstruct their theoretical common ancestor, which they call Proto-Indo-European, or PIE. Think of it as this ghost language that eventually gave birth to over 400 languages. We're talking the sacred verses of Sanskrit, the epics of ancient Greek, and yes, the English I'm speaking to you in right now. But the million-dollar question has always been, who spoke PIE, and where did they actually live? Well, for decades, the mainstream scientific consensus pointed straight to a group called the Yamanaya. These were remarkable, semi-nomadic pastoralists who lived out on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, which is just north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, they mastered something totally revolutionary. They domesticated horses, they built wagons, and then they expanded with just staggering speed. They moved west into Europe and southeast toward India, burying their dead in these elaborate mounds called kurgans. And according to the standard model, they brought Proto-Indo-European right along with them. The main reason this steppe theory became so completely dominant is that ancient DNA seemingly proved it. Back in 2015, the field of archaeogenetics just exploded, giving researchers what was essentially a genetic tracer die. They found that steppe DNA, specifically the R1A1 genetic marker, spread into Europe, and importantly for our story, arrived in South Asia between 2000 and 1500 BCE. That timeline perfectly matched the archaeological spread of chariots. So the mystery seemed totally solved, right? Case closed. Well, as we know, science never really sleeps. Section 2, a shock to the system, the 2023 study. Fast forward to July 2023, and the prestigious journal Science publishes an absolutely monumental paper. The lead author was Paul Heggarty from the Max Planck Institute, and he was backed by a staggering team of over 80 co-authors. And I have to stress, this wasn't just some small critique, it was a massive computational analysis of 161 languages. They mapped out 170 core vocabulary items that really resist borrowing. You know, basic stuff like words for body parts, simple verbs, and pronouns. They literally built the most comprehensive language matrix ever attempted. And the data produced by this massive study was completely groundbreaking. By mapping out the probability of the language family's origins, Heggarty's team found that the median root age for Proto-Indo-European was actually about 8,120 years ago. Let that sink in. That pushes the origin of this entire language family back a whopping 4 millennia earlier than what the standard steppe hypothesis allowed. And this new date creates some massive friction between two heavyweights of history. Section 3, the chronology problem, genetics versus linguistics. So, here is the core of the conflict. On one hand, you have hard DNA evidence showing steppe ancestry arriving in India between 2000 and 1500 BCE. But on the other hand, the new linguistic timeline from Heggarty's team shows the Indo-Iranian language branch diverging way earlier, around 3520 BCE. We are talking about a staggering 2,000-year gap between when the language supposedly broke off and when the genetics actually arrived in South Asia. Think about the massive headache this causes for the simple standard story. If steppe migrants brought the ancestor of Sanskrit to South Asia in 1500 BCE, they would be carrying a language that had supposedly already been evolving totally separately from its Anatolian roots for over 4,000 years. So how on earth did a language acquire shared vocabulary for wheels and chariots along the way if it split thousands of years before the wheel was even invented? Suddenly, that simple migration model starts buckling under the weight of this new timeline. To really make sense of this, we have to zoom in closely on the Indian subcontinent itself. Section 4, rethinking Vedic Sanskrit, a sister, not a mother. You know, there's a really common misconception out there that Vedic Sanskrit is the sole mother of all modern Indian languages, like Hindi or Bengali. But in reality, linguists have actually known for a long time that the Sanskrit of the Vedas is a preserved, far western sister dialect. It wasn't the single root. Rather, it was just one part of a much broader, highly diverse dialect continuum that already existed in the region. This whole idea builds a picture of South Asia not as some blank slate waiting for a language, but as an incredibly ancient, complex genetic landscape. Long before steppe DNA ever arrived, the subcontinent was already this profound synthesis of populations. You had deep Iranian plateau ancestry mixing with indigenous South Asian hunter-gatherers thousands of years ago. You had the mighty, sophisticated Indus Valley civilization. The steppe ancestry, it was just a later layer added to a world that was already ancient, complex, and extraordinarily diverse. The history of India is very much one of synthesis, not simple replacement.
So if the steppe theory doesn't perfectly fit the language timeline, and the Anatolian farming theory doesn't perfectly fit the DNA timeline, where do we go from here? Section 5, the hybrid homeland model, a complex new timeline.
To resolve all this tension, Heggarty's study proposes a really fascinating hybrid model. And what's great is this doesn't force us to choose between Anatolia or the steppe. Instead, it argues for both, just at different times. It suggests that the history of this massive language family wasn't one single explosive event, but rather multiple pulses of expansion over thousands of years, carrying different versions of the proto-language to different regions at entirely different times. Let's break this hybrid model down step by step, because it's super interesting. First, the original Proto-Indo-European homeland wasn't the northern steppe, but actually south of the Caucasus, in the northern Fertile Crescent, around 8,120 years ago. Second, an early branch, the ancestors of Indo-Iranian, travels east, going directly through the Iranian Plateau and into South Asia. Third, a completely separate branch heads north, moving through the Caucasus Mountains and onto the steppe around 7,000 years ago. Finally, step 4. Those steppe populations later explode into Europe, carrying both the genetics and the later European branches of the language. It elegantly separates the linguistic arrival in Asia from the later genetic arrival in Europe. What we are really looking at here is a massive paradigm shift. Section 6, a complex new synthesis, spread by prestige. This whole new timeline is a fantastic reminder that languages do not only spread through genetic replacement or violent conquest. Just look at the internal history of India itself. Sanskrit spread to South India, a region with very little steppe ancestry, as a language of pure prestige. It was adopted by the intellectual culture of Tamil Brahmins, it deeply influenced Kannada poetry, and it became a vehicle for Malayalam religious practice. It spread through institutions, religion, and literature. You don't always need an army to spread a language. Sometimes the culture itself is just powerful enough to do the heavy lifting. As the source material so wonderfully puts it, hold that openness. It will matter. The history of human migration is rarely just a simple, straight line drawn on a map. It's this beautifully messy, complicated story of mixing, trading, prestige, and continuous synthesis. The 2023 Heggarty study doesn't claim to have every single final answer, but it fundamentally reopens a massive question we all thought was totally settled. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought. We know for a fact that Sanskrit spread powerfully within the Indian subcontinent through prestige, religion, and culture, totally independent of genetic replacement. So if you could spread that way within India, why couldn't an early version of the language have spread that way out of it or into it, thousands of years earlier than we originally thought? As the science of computational linguistics and ancient DNA continues to evolve, the true origins of the very words we speak every single day might still be waiting to be completely discovered. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.